Imagine a world of storm-lashed seas and rugged coasts. A world where Norse longships carved their way through the waves, not only raiding but settling, forging kingdoms, and weaving themselves into the very fabric of Celtic lands. From the bustling heart of Dublin to the windswept Orkney Islands, from the Hebrides to the Isle of Man, the Vikings left their mark in ways still felt today. This is not just a story of conquest, but of culture, trade, and legacy. Welcome to Episode 6, Vikings in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isles. If you're fascinated by the untold corners of Viking history, you've come to the right place. So grab your mead horn, settle in by the fire, and join us as we dive deep into the Norse adventures across the Celtic West. And don't forget subscribe, and ring the bell, so you don't miss the next voyage into history. The seas between Norway, Ireland, and Scotland have always been treacherous. Jagged cliffs rise from the water, storms sweep down with little warning, and tides pull relentlessly at those daring enough to cross them. But for the Norsemen of the late 8th and early 9th centuries, these waters were less a barrier than a highway, a route to wealth, power, and new homes. When the first Viking raiders struck the coasts of Ireland and Scotland, they encountered lands rich in monasteries, gold, and strategic harbors. Yet what began as swift raids soon grew into something far greater. The Norse would not merely plunder these lands, they would live among them, shaping their politics, economies, and identities for centuries to come. The Viking arrival in Ireland. The first recorded Viking raid in Ireland came in the year 795 AD, when Norsemen attacked the monastery on Lambay Island, just off the coast near present-day Dublin. This was only 2 years after the infamous sack of Lindisfarne, showing how quickly the raiders expanded their horizons. Soon after, they struck Iona, the sacred monastery founded by St. Columba, and then moved further into the Irish coastline. The Irish annals record these early attacks with shock and fear. The annals of Ulster describe foreigners descending from the sea, burning churches, and taking captives. Yet the Irish, unlike the Anglo-Saxons of England, were not a centralized kingdom. Instead, Ireland was divided into many small kingdoms, each ruled by a local king, often at war with one another. This political fragmentation made the island vulnerable to Viking exploitation. By the 820s, Viking raids became frequent and devastating. They struck Armagh, the seat of the Irish Church, 3 times in 1 month. They plundered monasteries not only for their gold and relics, but for slaves, men, women, and children taken aboard longships and sold across the Norse world. But by the middle of the 9th century, something changed. The Norse stopped merely raiding. They began to settle. The founding of Dublin. In 841, a group of Vikings established a longport, a fortified ship enclosure on the River Liffey. This was the birth of Dublin. Unlike the transient raiding camps of the past, Dublin became a permanent base of operations. A settlement that would grow into one of the most important Norse cities in the British Isles. From Dublin, the Norse launched raids deeper into Ireland, but they also built a thriving trade hub. Exotic goods flowed through the port. Silver from the Islamic caliphates, silk from Byzantium, furs from the north, and slaves captured in Ireland and beyond. Dublin became one of the largest slave markets in Western Europe, its wealth built on human misery. But the Norse in Dublin were not simply foreign occupiers. They intermarried with local Irish families, forged alliances, and even adopted aspects of Gaelic culture. Over time, a unique hybrid identity emerged, the Hiberno-Norse. These were people who spoke both Old Norse and Gaelic, worshipped both Christ and the old gods, and whose names blended the traditions of 2 worlds. Viking kings of Dublin. Throughout the 9th and 10th centuries, Dublin was ruled by powerful Viking kings. One of the most famous was Onleib Conung, known in Old Norse as Ilafur, the White who came from Norway and established himself as King of Dublin in the 850s. He allied himself with Irish kings at times, and at other times fought bitter wars against them. The Viking rulers of Dublin were not content with their city alone. They sought to expand their influence across Ireland, challenging native kings for supremacy. In 1014, this ambition came to a dramatic climax at the Battle of Clontarf. The Battle of Clontarf, 1014. The Battle of Clontarf is one of the most famous clashes in Irish history. On one side stood Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland, determined to break Viking power once and for all. On the other stood the Norse of Dublin, allied with Leinster rebels and warriors from the Isle of Man and Orkney. The battle was brutal. Accounts tell of thousands slain in the fighting along the banks of the River Tolka. In the end, Brian Boru's forces won a decisive victory. The Viking army was shattered, their kings killed, and Dublin's power broken. Yet the cost was heavy. Brian himself was killed, and Ireland fell back into its familiar pattern of fragmented kingdoms. Though the Norse would remain in Dublin for generations to come, the Battle of Clontarf symbolized the end of their dream of dominating Ireland. The Norse in Scotland. While Ireland was a key Viking frontier, Scotland was equally transformed by Norse settlement. The northern and western Isles, Orkney, Shetland, and the Hebrides became Norse strongholds. Their rugged geography, with countless inlets and natural harbors, was perfectly suited to the seafaring Norse. The Orkneyinga saga, written centuries later, tells us that the Norse claimed these islands early in the Viking Age. The saga begins with the tale of Harald Fairhair, the first king of a united Norway, who around 875 AD sought to bring rebellious jarls under his rule. Many fled across the sea, settling in Orkney and Shetland. From there, they launched raids into both Scotland and Ireland. These islands soon became the seat of powerful jarls earls who ruled with near independence from Norway. The Earldom of Orkney was one of the longest-lasting Norse dominions outside Scandinavia, enduring well into the Middle Ages. The Hebrides and the Isle of Man, meanwhile, formed what was called the Kingdom of the Isles. This maritime kingdom linked Norway, Scotland, and Ireland, serving as a bridge of Norse influence across the western seas. Norse dominance in the northern and western Isles. The Earldom of Orkney, established by Norse settlers in the late 9th century, became a powerful base for the Vikings. These islands, with their rugged coastlines and fertile lands, provided both protection and resources. The Norse earls, known as jarls, were able to maintain a degree of independence from mainland Norway while asserting influence over neighboring islands and coasts. The Orkneyinga saga chronicles the lives of these jarls, from Thorfinnr, who solidified Norse power in Orkney through both cunning and warfare, to Sigurd the Mighty, who extended influence into mainland Scotland. The sagas, blending history and legend, reveal a world where loyalty, betrayal, and ambition intermingled, and where Norse settlers had to negotiate power not only with fellow Vikings, but also with local Pictish and Scottish rulers. In Shetland, Norse settlement was equally transformative. The islands became a vital link for raiding expeditions into mainland Scotland and northern England. Archaeological finds, including longhouses, burial mounds, and runic inscriptions, testify to a thriving Norse culture that merged with local traditions. The Kingdom of the Isles and the Hebrides. Further south, the Hebrides and the Isle of Man formed the Kingdom of the Isles. Here, Norse settlers encountered Gaelic populations, and over time, a distinctive Norse-Gaelic culture emerged. The Norse brought with them shipbuilding skills, trade networks, and martial prowess. The Gaelic inhabitants contributed local knowledge, language, and agricultural practices. By the 10th century, the Hebrides were dotted with Norse settlements and fortified sites known as duns. Norse rulers controlled sea lanes, exacted tribute from local communities, and established trade links stretching from Ireland to Norway and beyond. The Isle of Man, with its strategic position in the Irish Sea, became a political and economic hub, frequently contested by Norse and Gaelic rulers alike. This blending of cultures produced a vibrant hybrid society. Artifacts from this period reveal a fusion of Norse and Celtic designs, intricate metalwork, carved crosses with interlaced knot patterns, and runestones alongside Ogham inscriptions. The Norse did not erase the local culture. They wove themselves into it, leaving a legacy that would endure long after Viking armies had receded. Viking influence on Scottish politics. The Norse impact on Scotland extended beyond the islands. In the northern mainland, particularly Caithness and Sutherland, Norse influence was strong. Norse settlers established farms, trade centers, and coastal fortifications. They engaged in alliances, marriages, and warfare with local Pictish and later Scottish kings. One notable figure, Thorfinn the Mighty, Jarl of Orkney in the 11th century, ruled with a combination of diplomacy and military strength. He exerted influence over Caithness and beyond, balancing loyalty to Norway with pragmatism towards Scottish rulers. These Norse earls became integral to the political landscape, sometimes serving as kingmakers or mediators between rival factions. The maritime strength of Norse settlers ensured that the sea, rather than land, became the primary arena of control. Control of the Hebrides, Orkney, and Shetland meant control of the sea lanes, which in turn meant access to trade, raids, and strategic power. Norse-Gaelic culture and legacy. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Vikings in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isles was cultural rather than purely military. By intermarrying with local populations, adopting aspects of Gaelic law and custom, and integrating into local economies, the Norse created hybrid communities that shaped the region for centuries. The Norse-Gaelic language emerged as a blend of Old Norse and Gaelic, influencing place names, family names, and local dialects. Names such as MacLeod, Mahnacle, and Macmaskell bear witness to this intermingling. Many coastal towns in Scotland and Ireland, including Dublin, Limerick, and Waterford, retain Norse origins. Trade networks established by the Vikings persisted, linking Ireland, Scotland, and the Isles to Norway, the North Sea, and even as far as Byzantium. Silver hoards and artifacts unearthed in these regions testify to the wealth and reach of Viking commerce, clans, raids, and maritime power. The maritime culture of the Norse in these regions shaped the nature of conflict and settlement. Raiding was not merely opportunistic. It was a systematic method of asserting dominance, securing wealth, and establishing political alliances. Coastal settlements became launching points for raids into Ireland and Scotland, while inland rivers facilitated penetration into the heartlands. Viking longships, with their shallow drafts and speed, allowed sudden attacks and swift retreats. These capabilities forced local kings and chieftains to adapt, developing fortified sites, watchtowers, and alliances to counter Norse mobility, religion, and belief. Religious practices also reflected Norse influence. While many Vikings gradually converted to Christianity, especially in Ireland, where monasteries were central elements of Norse paganism, persisted. Rituals, burial customs, and symbolic art reveal a syncretic culture where old gods and new faiths coexisted. Burial mounds, boat graves, and stone crosses decorated with Norse motifs alongside Christian iconography testify to this blending of belief systems. Integration and decline of Viking political power. By the late 11th and early 12th centuries, the political dominance of the Norse in Ireland and Scotland began to wane. In Ireland, the High Kings and regional dynasties gradually reasserted control, while in Scotland, the Scottish crown extended its authority over the western seaboard and islands. However, Norse families remained influential. Many earls and local leaders continued to wield power, negotiating loyalty to both Scottish and Norwegian crowns. Even as raiding diminished, Norse mercantile and cultural presence endured, leaving an indelible mark on law, language, and society. Maritime trade and economic legacy. Beyond politics, the Vikings reshaped the economy of the region. Ports like Dublin, Waterford, and Cork became central nodes in North Sea and Atlantic trade networks. Goods ranging from timber, wool, and salt to silver, textiles, and slaves flowed through these towns, connecting Ireland, Scotland, and the Isles to Europe and the wider Viking world. This economic integration encouraged urban growth, craft specialization, and a more complex social structure. Norse settlers were not only warriors. They were merchants, artisans, and community leaders. Their cities became melting pots of cultures, where Celtic, Norse, and later Anglo-Norman traditions intertwined. Legendary figures and sagas. The history of the Vikings in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isles is populated with figures whose names echo through sagas and chronicles. In Ireland, Ira the Boneless, a leader of the Uimar dynasty, became notorious for his campaigns in Dublin and beyond. His cunning and ruthlessness made him a formidable figure, shaping Irish politics for decades. In Orkney, figures like Sigurd Lodverson, also known as Sigurd the Stout, combined martial prowess with diplomacy, securing alliances and defending Norse interests against emerging Scottish power. His life, chronicled in the Orkneyinga saga, epitomizes the Viking approach to leadership: adaptable, bold, and strategic. The sagas themselves, though composed centuries later, provide a rich tapestry of events and personalities. They blend historical fact with legend, capturing the spirit of the era, the daring raids, the complex family feuds, and the intricate interplay between Norse settlers and Celtic societies. Through these stories, the legacy of Viking influence is preserved not only in stone and artifact, but in narrative memory. Norse influence on art and architecture. Vikings left an enduring mark on the material culture of the regions they settled. In Ireland and Scotland, the fusion of Norse and Celtic styles is evident in carved stone crosses, jewelry, and household objects. These artifacts often feature intricate knotwork, animal motifs, and runic inscriptions, reflecting a hybrid aesthetic that celebrated both local tradition and Norse heritage. Settlement patterns also reflect Viking influence. Longhouses, fortifications, and shipyards were established across coastal areas, demonstrating not only military and economic adaptation, but also an integration with the surrounding landscape. Some of these sites, particularly in Orkney and the Hebrides, survive as archaeological evidence of Norse ingenuity and resilience. Cultural and linguistic legacy. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of Viking settlement is linguistic. Place names across Ireland, Scotland, and the Isles reveal Norse roots. Dublin, Wexford, Wicklow, Kirkwall, and Lewis are just a few examples. Surnames like MacLeod, MacNichol, and McCaskill remind us of generations of intermarriage and cultural blending. Language was not the only form of integration. Norse law, trade practices, and seafaring knowledge were adopted by local populations. The result was a vibrant, interconnected society, one that blended maritime skill, political acumen, and cultural exchange in a way that transformed the region. The Viking legacy today. Even centuries after the Viking Age, their influence endures. Archaeological sites, place names, linguistic traces, and cultural practices all testify to the deep impact of Norse settlement. Dublin streets trace the outline of its original Viking longport, while Orkney and Shetland bear evidence of Norse governance and social structures. Folklore, music, and storytelling continue to celebrate the Viking past. Annual festivals in Ireland and Scotland commemorate the Norse legacy, blending modern celebration with historical remembrance. And in museums and academic study, scholars continue to uncover new insights into how the Vikings reshaped these Celtic lands. The Viking identity in Ireland and Scotland. The Norse settlers were not simply invaders. They were builders, traders, and settlers who carved a distinct identity. Hiberno-Norse Dubliners, Norse-Gaels of the Hebrides, And the Orkney jarls all exemplify a hybrid identity that could survive political upheaval, cultural exchange, and the passage of time. These communities negotiated their place in a changing world. They adapted, intermarried, and integrated, creating a legacy that bridged Scandinavia and the Celtic lands. The story of the Vikings here is not one of mere conquest. It is a story of transformation, adaptation, and enduring influence. Conclusion and reflection. The Norsemen who sailed across the North Sea brought with them more than swords and ships. They brought a vision of mobility, trade, and cultural exchange. In Ireland, they established cities that became centers of commerce and power. In Scotland and the Isles, they created political structures and hybrid communities that endured for centuries. Their raids sparked fear, their settlements built prosperity, and their cultural blending shaped the medieval world. The Viking Age in Ireland, Scotland, and the Isles reminds us that history is rarely simple. It is the story of contact, conflict, and coexistence. From Dublin's bustling Viking longport to the windswept shores of Orkney and the Hebrides, the Norse left a mark that echoes through history. If you've enjoyed this journey into the world of Vikings, don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment with your favorite Viking story, and subscribe for more epic tales from the past. Ring the bell to join us on the next voyage through history, because the saga never ends. Thank you for sailing with us across stormy seas and Celtic lands. Until next time, may your own adventures be bold, and may the stories of the past guide your way.